"Don't worry," the millionaire said, laughing to his German partner. "The waitresses out here don't understand a word of it." The whole table laughed with him. They had no idea what they had just done, because the young woman standing behind them, holding a coffee pot, had understood every single syllable. And when she finally spoke, it was not in English. "Guten Abend," she said. "Perfect, effortless." Then, politely, she corrected his grammar in front of everyone. The laughter died instantly. Bradley Sterling had spent a year buying up Main Street, forcing an old veteran out of his own booth, hiding demolition orders inside contracts nobody could read. He thought a small-town waitress was nobody. He was wrong. She spoke 7 languages. Her father had been destroyed by a man exactly like him, and in 5 days, at a signing ceremony downtown, she was going to prove it in front of the entire town. There is a kind of silence people mistake for weakness. You have seen it before. A quiet person at the end of the counter. A person who never raises their voice. A person who takes the insult, wipes down the table, and keeps moving. Most folks look right past someone like that. They should not. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room has survived more than anyone else knows. This is a story about a small town called Millhaven, Vermont. Population: just under 4,000 people. The kind of place where neighbors still wave from their porches. The diner on Main Street has been open since 1962. The coffee is still $1.50, if you ask nicely. This is also a story about pride, about a man who believed money made him better than everyone around him, and about a young woman named Claire Ashford who let him believe that. For a while, she let him believe it right up until the moment he made his biggest mistake. He picked the wrong girl to humiliate. Before we begin, let me say one thing. This story is not really about languages, not at its heart. It is about the people we overlook every single day: the waitress, the old man in the corner booth, the quiet woman with the crossword puzzle. It is about what happens when we finally stop and really see them, so settle in. Pour yourself some coffee. Let's go back to that Thursday evening, when everything in Millhaven began to change. Chapter 1. The new girl in town. Claire had been in Millhaven for 6 weeks when this story begins. Millhaven was founded back in 1847 by a group of farmers and millers looking for good water. The town got its name from the old grain mill on the river. That mill still stands today. It is a museum now. The wheel still turns on summer weekends just to remind people where they came from. Folks in Millhaven were proud of that kind of history, proud of things that lasted. Every autumn, the maples along Main Street turned a deep, stubborn red, the kind postcards like to use, though nobody who actually lived there needed a postcard to appreciate it. Claire arrived in late September, driving a car that had seen better decades. She rented a small room above the hardware store. She kept mostly to herself. Nobody in town knew much about her. They knew she was 24. They knew she was polite, almost too polite, the kind that keeps people at a careful distance. They knew she worked hard. Nobody could remember her calling in sick even once. That was about all anyone knew. Claire took a job at the Wooden Spoon, the only real diner left in town. Red vinyl booths. A bell over the door that had rung 10,000 times a year for 6 decades. She waited tables 5 days a week, sometimes 6. She smiled at the regulars. She remembered how they liked their eggs. She refilled coffee before anyone had to ask twice. But watch her closely, and you might notice something odd. Every so often, when a tourist passed through speaking rapid French, her eyes would flick toward them. Just for a second. Then she would look away and go back to wiping the counter, as if nothing had happened at all. Nobody caught it. Except one person did. Her name was Margaret Hale. She was about to become the second most important person in this story. Chapter 2. The Wooden Spoon. Before we go further, you should understand this diner. It matters. The Wooden Spoon was not just a restaurant. It was the beating heart of Millhaven. It belonged to a man named Owen Whitfield, 61 years old, a widower who had inherited the place from his own father. Owen was not a rich man, far from it. But he loved that diner the way some men love their old trucks, stubbornly, completely. He arrived every morning before sunrise, long before the first customer, just to hear the old griddle warm up the way it always had. Regulars joked that Owen and the diner had aged into the same stubborn shape, same creak in the floorboards near the register, same dependable warmth, no matter the weather outside. Owen employed 2 waitresses that fall. Claire was one of them. The other was a woman named Roz Calloway, 53 years old. She had been slinging plates at the Wooden Spoon for almost 20 years. Roz had seen every kind of customer walk through that door. Her laugh carried 3 booths in either direction. Her patience for anyone who looked lost seemed bottomless. She had lost her own husband 11 years back. A heart attack, right there in the parking lot outside, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She rarely spoke of it, but it shaped her, in a quiet way. She understood, better than most, how fast an ordinary day could turn into something else entirely. She took a liking to Claire almost right away. "You're too quiet for this job, honey," Roz told her once, during a slow Tuesday shift. "Gotta talk to people. Let them in a little." Claire smiled at that. A small, careful smile. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I just like listening better." Roz laughed and let it drop. But there was truth buried in that answer. Claire liked listening. She had learned that a long time ago. People reveal far more when they think nobody understands them. That habit was about to matter more than anyone could guess. Chapter 3: The Regulars. Every diner has its regulars. The Wooden Spoon was no different. There was a booth by the window that belonged unofficially to a man named Walter Higgins. Walter was 82 years old. He had lived in Millhaven his whole life. The one exception was 4 years in his 20s, when he served his country overseas. He rarely spoke about that time. When he did, the room went quiet, out of respect more than curiosity. After he came home, Walter opened an auto shop 2 blocks from the diner. He ran it for 35 years, fixing half the cars in Millhaven at one point or another. He never charged the widows full price. Everyone in town knew it. Nobody ever said so out loud because that was exactly how Walter wanted it. Walter came into the Wooden Spoon every morning at 7:15. Same order every time. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, no sugar. He sat in the same booth every time too, the one by the window where the morning light came in soft and gold. Everyone in town knew that booth was Walter's. Nobody sat there, not because anyone told them to, just because it felt like the right thing to do. Then there was Margaret Hale. Margaret was 78, a retired professor who had spent over 30 years teaching language studies at a small college 2 hours south. She moved to Millhaven after her husband passed. She wanted someplace quiet to spend the years she had left. Margaret came in most afternoons around 2. Tea and a crossword puzzle, or an old paperback with a cracked spine. She rarely talked much either, but she watched, carefully, the way people do when a whole career was built on paying attention to how others speak. Walter and Margaret barely knew each other at first. 2 regulars who liked the Wooden Spoon because it never changed. But change was coming. It arrived that autumn, in the shape of a man named Bradley Sterling. Chapter 4: The Man Buying Up Main Street. By late September, everyone in Millhaven knew the name Sterling. Bradley Sterling was 45 years old. He had grown up 2 towns over, in a house smaller, by his own account, than his current garage. He built Sterling Automotive Group from almost nothing, one small parts supplier at a time, until it became a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He was, by most measures, a self-made success. He was also becoming a problem for the town he had once called home. Over the past year, Sterling had quietly bought up a large stretch of Main Street, the old bookstore, the barber shop, 2 of the 3 empty storefronts near the square. Rumors moved fast in a town that size. Some folks said Sterling planned a shopping plaza. Others said he meant to tear the old buildings down completely and put up something with his name on it. Nobody knew for certain. Sterling had not made his full plans public. What people did know was this: Sterling was deep in negotiations with a German investment group, led by a man named Klaus Bergmann. If the deal closed, it would bring a large new manufacturing partnership to the region. It would also hand Sterling the money and leverage to do almost anything he wanted with the rest of Main Street. Nobody at the Wooden Spoon knew yet how much that fact would come to matter. Chapter 5: A Town Worth Protecting. To understand why any of this mattered, you have to understand what Main Street really meant to the people of Millhaven. It was not just a row of old buildings. It was Ruth Calder's flower shop, open since 1979. It was the barber shop where 3 generations of the same families still got their hair cut. It was the bookstore where old Mr. Danby used to let kids read for free on rainy afternoons. A few blocks further down sat a modest brick apartment building called Maple Court. Many of the town's older residents lived there. Walter's sister-in-law had a unit on the 2nd floor. So did 3 of Margaret's church friends. Most of the folks living and working along that street were older now, retired, or close to it. Many depended on the modest rent they paid, or the modest income their small shops still brought in. For people like that, a shopping plaza was not progress. It was an ending. Owen understood this better than most. The wooden spoon was not just his livelihood. It was where his late wife had waitressed the summer they met. Back in 1987, he still kept her old apron folded in a drawer behind the register, though he never mentioned it to anyone, and nobody ever asked. Every booth held a memory. Every crack in the counter had a story behind it. Losing that diner would not simply cost him a job. It would cost him a piece of who he was. That was the weight Sterling carried into town that autumn, whether he understood it or not. Some men build things. Others simply take what other people built and call it progress. Nobody yet knew which kind of man Bradley Sterling truly was. They were about to find out. Chapter 6. The night it all began. Autumn was settling over Millhaven that week. The maples on Main Street had just begun to turn. Nobody in town was thinking about deadlines or deals or business partnerships from overseas. They were thinking about pie season and the first frost, about whether the church fundraiser would beat last year's total. That would all change on a Thursday evening at exactly 6:40. The dinner rush was in full swing. Every booth was nearly full. Roz moved fast between tables while Owen worked the grill himself. Sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. Claire was refilling coffee at the counter when the bell over the door rang, sharp and sudden. She looked up. Sterling walked in first, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Claire made in 2 months. Behind him came a small group in business attire. At the center of them stood an older man with silver hair and careful, kind eyes. That man was Klaus Bergman. Sterling scanned the diner like he already owned it. Given the property deals in a way, he nearly did. He glanced at the specials board without much interest, then let his eyes wander toward the window. His eyes landed on the booth Walter always sat in. Walter Higgins was there now too, as he was most evenings that week, having a late supper alone. "That one," Sterling said to Owen, pointing without even looking at him. "We need that table. 6 of us." Now, Owen's face went tight. "That booth's usually reserved, Mr. Sterling," he said carefully. "I can get you a table just as good, right over here." Sterling did not glance at the table Owen offered. "I didn't ask for just as good," he said. "I asked for that one." A heavy pause settled over the room. Walter had heard every word. He set down his fork without a sound. It was the way a man does when he has decided a fight is not worth having. "It's fine," he said, already sliding out of the booth. "I was about done anyway." He was not, in fact, about done. His plate still had half a meal on it. But he stood, gathered his coat, and walked toward the counter without another word. Claire watched the whole thing happen. Something cold settled low in her chest. Chapter 7. A quiet kind of anger. Claire helped Walter onto a stool at the counter. "You didn't have to move for him," she said, low enough that only Walter could hear. Walter gave a small shrug. His hands, weathered but steady despite his age, folded calmly in his lap. "Man like that," he said, "isn't worth the trouble of arguing with. He'll learn his lesson eventually." "They usually do." There was no bitterness in his voice, only the tired patience of someone who had watched the world turn for 8 decades. "Let me get you a fresh plate," Claire said, "on the house." "You don't have to do that, sweetheart." "I know," she said. "I want to." She turned toward the kitchen window. That was when Sterling's voice rose again, carrying easily across the crowded diner. "Herr Bergman," Sterling was saying, in an accent that was trying hard and mostly failing. "Ich hoffe, Sie mögen amerikanisches Essen." He was speaking German. Badly. He turned to his group with a small, satisfied smile, clearly pleased with himself. "Don't worry," he added in English, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "The waitresses out here don't understand a word of it. Small town, you know how it is." A ripple of laughter moved through his group. Polite laughter. The kind people give a boss whether the joke lands or not. In the kitchen, Owen glanced up from the grill just long enough to catch the tail end of it through the pass window. He said nothing, but his jaw set in a way Roz recognized from years of working beside him. "Man's got some nerve," Roz muttered, sliding 2 plates onto her tray. "Talking about my town like that in my town." "Leave it be, Roz," Owen said quietly, not looking up from the grill. "Not our fight tonight." Klaus Bergman did not laugh. He glanced toward the counter. something apologetic crossing his face, as though he wanted to say sorry to whoever might have overheard. Claire had overheard every word. She set down the coffee pot and walked toward the table. Chapter 8. The answer nobody expected. Guten Abend, Claire said when she reached the table. The words came out smooth, effortless. Not the careful, halting German of a second-year student, the kind of German that comes from years of practice. Sterling's smile froze halfway on his face. Bergman's eyebrows rose in open surprise. Claire kept going, still in perfect German. She asked whether the table would like drinks first. Then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned that Sterling's earlier phrase had used the wrong verb form. She offered the correction gently, the way a teacher corrects a student she happens to like. Then she switched back to English, smooth as anything. "Can I start anyone off with something to drink?" Nobody at the table said a word for a moment. Bergman recovered first, letting out a short, delighted laugh. He said something quickly in German to the man beside him, gesturing toward Claire with open admiration. Sterling's face cycled through 3 colors in about 5 seconds. Pale, red, then a strange, forced shade of amusement. "Well," he said, trying to laugh it off, "look at that. Hidden talents, not so hidden," Claire said pleasantly. "I just don't usually bring it up." Her tone stayed light, friendly even. No triumph in it, no edge. But everyone at that table understood exactly what had happened. The joke had landed on Sterling instead. He knew it too. Chapter 9. A line, not a fight. Sterling recovered his composure fast. Men like him always do, on the surface at least. "Aren't you full of surprises?" he said, his voice cooling by several degrees. "Where'd a waitress in a place like this learn German?" There was a small emphasis on the word waitress, a small cruelty tucked inside a compliment. Claire noticed. She let it pass. "Here and there," she said simply. "Can I get you started with drinks, or would you like a few minutes with the menu?" Sterling studied the room for a moment, the way a man studies a puzzle that has begun to annoy him. "Water for the table," he said finally, waving a hand. "Sparkling if you have it. Not whatever they serve at gas stations around here." "We have San Pellegrino," Claire said. "I'll bring 6. She turned to go. That was when Sterling added something, low enough to be almost under his breath. Not quite low enough. "Don't get used to the attention, sweetheart. Not everyone's impressed by parlor tricks." Claire paused, only for a second. Then she turned back and met his eyes directly, not with anger, with something steadier than anger. "I'm not trying to impress anyone, Mr. Sterling," she said. "I just don't like watching someone get mocked in a language they can't defend themselves in." Her gaze flicked briefly toward Walter at the counter, or moved out of their favorite seat, for that matter. The table went quiet again. Bergman watched the exchange with real interest now. His attention moved between Claire and Sterling. He looked like a man reading a story he had not expected to find here. "I don't need trouble," Claire added, calm and even. "But I don't run from it either, when it comes looking." She walked off to fetch the water. Nobody at the table spoke again for almost a full minute. Before Sterling's group left that evening, Klaus Bergman found a quiet moment near the register. Claire was cashing out another table nearby. "Fräulein," he said, in German this time, "Ich wollte mich entschuldigen für das Verhalten meines Geschäftspartners." I wanted to apologize for my business partner's behavior. Claire looked up, caught off guard by the gesture. "You have nothing to apologize for." "Herr Bergman," she answered, also in German. "His behavior is not yours to carry." Bergman considered that, something warm and thoughtful crossing his expression. "In my experience," he said slowly, "a person's true character shows most clearly in how they treat those who cannot help them in return." His glance drifted briefly toward Walter, then back to Claire. "I have seen a great deal today," he added. "More than Mr. Sterling perhaps realizes." He nodded once politely and rejoined his group at the door. Claire stood there a moment, turning his words over. She did not yet know how much they would come to matter. Chapter 10. Whispers after closing. By the time Sterling's group finally left, nearly 2 hours later, most of the diner had heard some version of what happened. Roz caught it secondhand from the table beside Sterling's and practically ran to the kitchen. "You should have seen his face," she told Owen, grinning ear to ear. "Big shot Sterling thinking he's got one over on the small-town girl. She just answers him. In German. Perfect German." Owen shook his head slowly. A small smile tugged at his mouth, despite the stress of the night. "That girl's full of surprises," he said. That's exactly what he said. Roz laughed, word for word. Once the rush finally slowed, Claire found herself wiping down the counter near Walter, who was finishing the fresh plate she had brought him. "You didn't have to do that," Walter said. "Stand up for me like that." "Yes, I did," Claire said simply. Walter looked at her a moment. "Not many young folks would," he said. "Most people look right past an old man these days. Like we're furniture." "You're not furniture," Claire said. "You gave 4 years of your life for the rest of us. That deserves a booth by the window, at the very least." Walter's eyes went a little glassy. He looked down at his coffee cup and cleared his throat. It was the way older men do, when a feeling gets too close to the surface. "How'd you learn that language anyway?" he asked. Claire hesitated, only slightly. "My father," she said. "He believed in learning languages. Said it was the fastest way to understand people. Sounds like a smart man." Something flickered across her face, something quiet and painful. "He was," she said, her voice dropping. "Was." Walter did not press further. That was simply the kind of man he was. But someone else in the diner that night had caught the word too. Chapter 11. Margaret Hale starts watching. Margaret Hale had come in later than usual that evening. A neighbor mentioned the commotion to her on the way home, and curiosity won out. She took her usual seat and ordered tea. Then she watched the second half of the evening unfold, from a quiet booth near the back. She had heard the exchange with Sterling. She had heard the correction about verb form, delivered so naturally it barely registered as remarkable to most people in the room. But Margaret had spent 30 years studying language, studying accents, studying the small details that reveal where someone truly learned to speak. What she had heard was not a tourist's German. It was not classroom German either, the kind most people pick up after a few semesters in college. It was fluent, precise, layered with vocabulary that comes only from real conversation, never from a textbook. The kind of German you learn from someone who spoke it at home. Margaret sat with her tea going cold, turning the puzzle over in her mind. When Claire came by to check on her, Margaret looked up and asked, almost casually, in flawless French, "Vous parlez français aussi, poète?" "Do you speak French as well, perhaps?" It was a small test. Quiet. The kind only another linguist would think to set. Claire blinked, caught slightly off guard. Then, without missing a beat, she answered, in French, just as fluent as the German had been. "Un peu," she said. "Just a little." It was not just a little, and Margaret knew it immediately. An old memory stirred somewhere Margaret had not visited in a long time. "Interesting," she said quietly, switching back to English. "Very interesting." Claire offered a small, uncertain smile and moved on to the next table. Margaret stayed a long while after that, staring at nothing in particular. She turned something over in her mind she was not yet ready to say aloud. Chapter 12. A memory, half formed later that night. Alone in her small apartment above the hardware store, Claire sat on the edge of her bed. A worn leather notebook rested in her lap. The cover was cracked with age. The corners had gone soft and rounded from years of handling. Inside, careful handwriting filled the pages in 7 different languages. Translations, notes, small phrases collected over years of study. Claire ran her thumb along the edge of one page, tracing letters that were not her own, her father's handwriting. She could still hear his voice sometimes when she read those pages. Patient, steady. She was 8 years old again in her mind, sitting at a scarred wooden kitchen table. Her father sat across from her, sleeves rolled up, a cup of tea going cold beside him. "Say it back to me," he told her that evening, pointing to a word written in careful script. "Not the sound. The meaning underneath it." "Why does that matter?" young Claire had asked him. "A word is just a word." Her father smiled at that. The same patient smile she remembered so clearly now. "No," he said gently. "A word is a window. If you only hear the sound, you miss the person standing behind it." He used to say fluency was not about vocabulary. It was about listening closely. Closely enough to know what someone was really trying to say, underneath the words they chose. He said it applied to more than language, too. It applied to people, to the tired waitress, to the lonely old man, to anyone the world had stopped looking at closely. "Everyone is speaking a language, Claire," he told her once. "Even the ones who never say a word. Your job," he added, "is simply to learn how to listen." Claire opened her eyes again, back in her small room, the notebook still resting against her chest. She had not planned to use any of this in Millhaven. She had come to this small town precisely because nobody knew her here. Because nobody would ask questions. because a quiet job in a quiet diner was exactly the life she needed, at least for a while. But tonight, without meaning to, she had let something slip, a small piece of who she really was. She wondered, staring at the ceiling in the dark, whether that had been a mistake. She had no way of knowing yet how right she was to wonder. Chapter 13. The morning after. By Friday morning, half of Millhaven had heard some version of what happened at the Wooden Spoon. Small towns work that way. News travels faster than the mail ever could. The breakfast crowd was thicker than usual. A few customers who normally drove to the gas station diner 2 towns over showed up instead. They were hoping for a glimpse of the waitress who had put the big shot in his place. Walter was back in his window booth by 7:15, right on schedule. 2 eggs, over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, no sugar. Nobody tried to move him this time. Heard you gave that Sterling fellow quite a surprise, one customer said, grinning as Claire refilled his cup. I just did my job, she said, keeping her voice light. Sure you did, the man said, winking at Walter, who allowed himself a small, satisfied smile over his coffee. Ruth Calder stopped by the counter on her way to open the flower shop, a bundle of unsold chrysanthemums tucked under one arm. Whole town's talking about you this morning, Ruth said. In a good way, mind you. First time Bradley Sterling's gotten told off since he moved back to buy up half our street. I wasn't trying to tell anyone off, Claire said. Sometimes the truth does that on its own, Ruth said, patting her hand before heading out the door. Around 9, the phone behind the counter rang. Owen answered, wiping his hands on his apron. Claire noticed his expression change almost immediately. The easy morning warmth drained out of it, replaced by something tighter. He spoke quietly for a few minutes, mostly listening, offering short answers. I understand, he said finally. We'll be in touch. He hung up and stood there, staring at the receiver like it had bitten him. Everything all right, Owen? Roz asked, passing by with a tray of dirty plates. Fine, Owen said, a touch too quickly. Just the property management company. Routine call. Roz raised an eyebrow but did not push. Owen was not a man who liked being pushed. Claire had caught the tail end of what he said into the phone, just before he noticed her listening. Something about a lease review. Something about terms that could change, depending on how certain relationships in town developed going forward. She did not know exactly what it meant yet, but she had a feeling, deep and quiet, that it meant nothing good. Chapter 14. The second visit. Bradley Sterling did not let things go easily. That was simply not in his nature. 2 days later, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, he walked into the Wooden Spoon alone. No entourage this time. No business partner watching his every move. Just Sterling, sliding into a booth near the counter. He carried the easy confidence of a man who had never once considered he might be unwelcome anywhere. Claire was working the counter that afternoon. She saw him come in, and her stomach tightened, though her face gave nothing away. She had learned, a long time ago, how to keep her expression still. It had been useful in another life. It turned out to be useful here too. She approached his table with her notepad, professional and calm. What can I get you, Mr. Sterling? Just coffee, he said. Then, after a pause, with a small, deliberate smile, and maybe a little conversation. Seeing as you're apparently a woman of hidden talents. Claire kept her expression neutral. I'll get your coffee, she said, turning to go. Sit down a minute, Sterling said. It was less a request than an instruction. Claire hesitated. Roz, watching from across the room, gave her a small, questioning look. Claire shook her head slightly. She could handle this on her own. She stayed standing. I've got other tables, Mr. Sterling. The diner's half empty, he said, glancing around the mostly quiet room. You've got a minute. Something in his tone had shifted since 2 nights before. The mocking edge remained, but underneath it now sat something closer to curiosity. Even strangely, a respect he did not want to admit to. You're not from around here originally, are you? Sterling said. It was less a question than an observation. No, Claire said simply. Where then? Here and there, she said again. I move around. He studied her, the way a man reads a report that does not quite add up. Most people who move around that much are running from something, he said. Claire held his gaze steadily. Or towards something, she said. Depends on the person. Where'd you really learn languages like that? He pressed. And don't give me the here and there answer you gave the old man. I want the real story. Her jaw tightened, just slightly, at the mention of Walter. That's not really your business, Mr. Sterling. Everything in this town is my business these days, he said. and there was no humor in it. You might want to remember that. The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been for a Saturday afternoon in a small diner. Chapter 15, a line drawn quietly. Claire set her notepad down on the table deliberately and met his eyes. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Sterling," she said steady and low. "I don't care how much property you own on this street." His eyebrows rose slightly, surprised by the directness. "None of that gives you the right to treat people like they're beneath you," Claire went on. "Not Walter. Not me. Not anyone who walks through that door. That's a bold thing to say to someone who could make your life very difficult around here," Sterling said, quieter now, but no less pointed. "Maybe," Claire said. "But I've dealt with harder things than a difficult life, Mr. Sterling. You'd be surprised." Something flickered across his face for a moment. Curiosity mixed with something else. Something almost like unease. "You still haven't answered my question," he said. "The languages. Where did that come from?" Claire took her time answering. "My father taught me," she said simply. "He believed that if you take the time to really learn how someone speaks, you can understand who they are." Sterling leaned back a little in the booth. "And what does my English tell you about me?" he asked, half joking, half genuinely curious. Her answer came quiet and even. "That you're used to people being afraid of you," she said, "and that you've mistaken that fear for respect." The diner around them seemed to hold its breath. Sterling stared at her, something unreadable behind his eyes. "You still have a chance to step back from that, Mr. Sterling," Claire added, softer now, almost gently. "Not everybody gets that chance. You still do." She picked up her notepad and walked away to get his coffee, leaving him alone in the booth, the confident smile gone entirely from his face. Chapter 16, what Margaret remembered. That evening, as the dinner crowd thinned, Margaret Hale returned to the wooden spoon carrying a small folder under her arm. She waited until Claire had a quiet moment, then gestured her over to the booth. "Do you have a few minutes, dear?" Margaret asked. "After your shift, perhaps. I would like to talk with you." There was something in Margaret's voice, careful and gentle, that stirred an old, familiar wariness in Claire's chest. "Is something wrong?" Claire asked. "No, nothing like that," Margaret said quickly. "I simply have a question, and I think you might be the only person who can answer it." Claire finished her shift a little after 8. Roz offered to close up alone, giving her a small, knowing look, as though she understood something important was about to happen. Claire found Margaret waiting at a corner booth. 2 cups of tea sat already poured, steam rising softly between them. "Sit, please," Margaret said. Claire sat. Margaret opened the folder. Inside was a single photograph, old and slightly faded. It showed a group of people standing outside a large stone building. The building looked official, formal. She slid it across the table. "I want to ask you something," Margaret said carefully, "and there is no wrong answer. I am not trying to pry into anything you don't want to share." Claire looked down at the photograph. Her breath caught, though she tried to hide it. There, in the second row, stood a tall man with kind eyes and a careful, patient smile. A face she would have known anywhere, in any lifetime. Her father. Margaret watched Claire's reaction closely. Her old instincts confirmed what she had begun to suspect 2 nights earlier. "Claire," Margaret said gently, her voice barely above a whisper, "is your last name, by any chance, Ashford?" Chapter 17, the question that changed everything. Claire sat frozen, staring down at the photograph. She had not seen that photo in years. She had not expected to see it again. Not here, in a diner booth, in a small town far from the life she used to live. "How do you have this?" she finally managed. "I taught language studies for over 30 years, Margaret said. "In those circles, you meet a great many talented people over the decades. You remember the truly exceptional ones." She tapped the photograph softly. "Your father was one of the finest linguists I ever came across," she continued. "Edward Ashford. I met him only twice at conferences many years ago, but I never forgot him." Claire's eyes had gone glassy. Her hands trembled where they rested on the table. "You knew him," she whispered. "I knew of him, mostly," Margaret said. "But I also knew what happened to him. The accusations. The scandal that ended his career." Claire's throat tightened painfully. "It destroyed him," she said, her voice barely holding steady. "None of it was true, but it didn't matter. Once the accusations came out, nobody wanted to hear the truth. He lost everything," she went on. "His position, his reputation." Eventually, she could not finish the sentence. she did not need to. Margaret reached across the table and covered Claire's hand with her own. "I am so very sorry," she said, her voice low. "I remember hearing about it years ago. I never believed it for what it's worth." "Anyone who knew his character understood it. Made no sense," Margaret added. Claire wiped quickly at her eyes, embarrassed by the sudden emotion. "I spent 2 years being angry at everyone," she admitted. "The people who accused him, the ones who believed it, even him, a little, for not fighting harder." Margaret listened without interrupting. That, Claire realized, was exactly what a good listener does. "And now?" Margaret asked. "Now I mostly just miss him," Claire said. The anger got tired. The missing him never did. Margaret squeezed her hand once, then let go, giving Claire room to compose herself. "Grief does that," she said. "It outlasts everything else we feel. I sometimes think that might be its whole purpose." "Why are you telling me this now?" Claire finally asked. "Why does it matter?" Margaret's expression turned serious, thoughtful, the look of someone weighing whether to say something important. "Because, my dear," she said slowly, "I have a terrible feeling the past does not always stay buried." She glanced toward the window, toward Main Street, toward the direction of Sterling Automotive's newly purchased buildings, glowing faintly under the streetlights. "And I have an even worse feeling," she continued, "that it may be walking straight back into your life." Claire followed her gaze out the window, her heart pounding. Somewhere out there in 5 days, a signing ceremony was set to take place. A ceremony sealing a partnership between Bradley Sterling and Klaus Bergman. Nobody in that diner yet understood why, but that ceremony was about to become the center of something far bigger than a business deal. Something that had started years before Claire ever set foot in Millhaven. Something that was about to catch up with all of them. Margaret studied Claire's face, the way a teacher studies a student who has just understood something important. "You know," she said finally, "in 30 years of teaching, I learned something about people that surprised me." "What's that?" Claire asked. "The ones who survive the worst things," Margaret said, "are rarely the loudest ones in the room afterward. They are usually the quietest. They carry it differently," she went on. "They keep moving, keep working, keep being kind, even when kindness was never returned to them." Claire looked down at the photograph again, at her father's kind, patient face. "He used to say the same thing," she said, "about people who suffer well. He said it was its own kind of quiet courage." "Sounds like he was right about a great many things," Margaret said. They sat together a moment, the tea going cold between them, the diner nearly empty around them now. "Margaret," Claire finally said, "if this really is connected to what happened to my father, I don't know what to do about it." "You don't have to know yet," Margaret said, covering Claire's hand with her own again. "Nobody figures out the whole path on the first night. You simply take the next honest step in front of you. And if the next step is dangerous, then you take it anyway," Margaret said, carefully. "But you take it. Running never actually protects anyone, dear. It only postpones the reckoning." Claire looked down at the photograph once more, at her father's steady eyes. Somewhere in the quiet of that booth, something in her shifted. Something that had been folded small and careful for 2 long years began, slowly, to unfold. She was not ready to fight yet. But for the first time since arriving in Millhaven, she was no longer entirely sure she wanted to keep hiding either. There is an old saying, one Claire's father used to repeat often. He said it back when she was still a little girl, learning her first foreign words at his kitchen table. He used to say that truth has patience. It can wait a very long time, but it never simply disappears. Claire did not know it yet, sitting in that booth with Margaret's hand resting gently over hers. But her father's truth was about to find its way back, and it was going to need her help to get there. Claire walked home alone that night, the photograph tucked carefully inside her jacket, the streets of Millhaven quiet under a sky full of early stars. She passed the hardware store, the barber shop, the dark windows of the old bookstore. She passed the modest brick outline of Maple Court in the distance, porch lights glowing soft and yellow. None of it looked any different than it had that morning. Everything about it felt different anyway. She let herself into her small apartment and set the photograph beside her father's notebook, the two of them resting side by side for the first time in years. Somewhere out there, a clock had already begun counting down. 5 days until a signing ceremony would either seal Bradley Sterling's ambitions or begin to unravel them entirely. Claire did not know yet which it would be. She only knew, lying awake long after midnight, that she no longer intended to watch it happen from a distance. Before we continue, let's remember something. Bullies rarely announce themselves plainly. They dress their cruelty up in language, in contracts, in zoning codes nobody bothers to read. That is exactly what makes them dangerous. And it is exactly why the quiet ones, the ones who read carefully, matter so much. Chapter 18. The weight of a name. Sunday morning came in gray and quiet over Millhaven. Claire woke early before her alarm, the way people do when their mind has too much to sort through. She sat at the small table in her apartment, her father's notebook open in front of her. She had already read it twice, cover to cover, hunting for something she could not name. A knock came at her door around 8. It was Margaret, holding 2 cups of coffee from the corner bakery, her expression careful. "I thought you might not have slept well," she said, stepping inside without waiting to be asked twice. "You'd be right," Claire admitted. They sat together at the small table. Margaret's eyes lingered on Claire's face a moment before she spoke again. "I want you to know something," she said. "You do not owe this town an explanation. You do not owe Bradley Sterling one either." "I know," Claire said. "But I also think," Margaret went on, "that some truths do not stay buried simply because we ask them nicely." Claire looked down at her father's handwriting, faded ink on a soft, worn page. "He used to say that too," she said, almost word for word. Margaret smiled at that, small and sad at once. "Great minds," she said. She glanced around the small apartment, taking in the bare walls, the single chair, the careful lack of anything permanent. "You travel light," Margaret observed. "Habit," Claire said. "Easier to leave a place when you never really unpack." "And are you planning to leave this one?" Claire considered the question longer than she expected to. "I honestly don't know anymore," she admitted. 6 weeks ago I would have said yes without thinking twice. And now there's Walter's booth, and Roz's terrible jokes. And you, apparently, showing up with coffee at 8 in the morning. Margaret's eyes crinkled with the beginning of a smile. "Small towns have a way of doing that," she said. "Sneaking up on people who weren't planning to stay." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sunlight eased through the window. The coffee cooled untouched between them. It was, in its own small way, exactly what Claire needed. 4 days. That was all that remained before the signing ceremony at Millhaven Town Hall. 4 days before Sterling and Bergman made their partnership official and permanent. Neither woman knew yet how much would happen before then, or how quickly a quiet Sunday could turn into something none of them would forget. Outside, a delivery truck rattled past, and somewhere down the block, a church bell marked the half hour, indifferent to the quiet reckoning building inside that small apartment. Chapter 19. The call from Bergman's office. The call came into the Wooden Spoon just after 11 that morning. Owen answered the phone behind the counter, his brow furrowing almost immediately. "Yes," he said. "Yes, she's here. May I ask what this is regarding?" He listened for a long stretch. Then he covered the receiver with his palm. A regular at the counter glanced up, curious, before returning to his newspaper when Owen waved him off with an apologetic smile. "Claire," he said. "It's someone from Mr. Bergman's office." Her stomach tightened. She took the phone carefully. "This is Claire." The voice on the other end was polite, efficient, speaking in accented but capable English. "Miss Ashford, my name is Felix Roth. I am legal counsel for Herr Bergman. How can I help you?" "Our translator for tomorrow's negotiation session has had a family emergency," Roth explained. "A car accident, nothing life-threatening, but she cannot travel." Claire's mind was already racing ahead of him. "Herr Bergman specifically requested you," Roth continued. "He said you demonstrated, and I am quoting him directly, an unusually precise command of the language." She glanced toward Owen, who was watching her with open curiosity. "I'm not a professional interpreter, Mr. Roth. I waitress here. Herr Bergman is aware of your profession," Roth said, a note of quiet respect entering his voice. "He does not consider that a disqualification. Quite the opposite, in fact." There was a pause. "The session is tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon, Roth added. "At the Millhaven Inn conference room. We would be very grateful for your assistance." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. "Can I have a few hours to think it over?" "Of course," Ruth said. "Please call this number by this evening." He gave her the number, thanked her, and ended the call. Claire set the phone down, her hand trembling just slightly. "Well," Owen said. "That sounded important." "It was," she said. Roz emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, sensing the shift in the room right away. She had a talent for that, sensing shifts in a room before anyone said a single word about them. "What did I miss?" she asked. Owen explained it quickly, keeping his voice low so the handful of remaining customers wouldn't overhear. Roz's eyebrows climbed higher with every sentence. "They want you to translate their big fancy business deal," she said finally. "The one worth who knows how many millions. They want somebody they trust," Claire said. "Apparently that's me, for reasons I still don't fully understand." "I understand it just fine," Roz said, crossing her arms. "You told the truth to a room full of people who don't hear it very often. People remember that." Claire managed a small, tired smile. "I need to think about it," she said. "It's not a small thing to say yes to." "No," Roz agreed. "It isn't." She glanced toward the window, toward the quiet stretch of Main Street outside. Autumn light falling gold across the empty sidewalk. "Whatever you decide," Roz added, softer now, "this town's already decided it likes you. That much I know for certain." She squeezed Claire's shoulder before heading back toward the kitchen, leaving Claire alone with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm and a decision she did not yet know how to make. Chapter 20, a reluctant. Yes, Claire spent that afternoon walking the length of Main Street, trying to think. She passed the flower shop, where Ruth Calder was sweeping fallen leaves off the front step, humming something under her breath. She passed the barber shop, its striped pole spinning lazily. Two old men argued good-naturedly through the open door about a football game. She passed the old bookstore with its faded gold lettering. The windows were still decorated with a hand-lettered sign advertising the fall reading program. Each storefront held a small piece of somebody's whole life. She was only beginning to understand how many. She passed Maple Court Apartments, the modest brick building where many of the town's older residents lived. Walter's sister-in-law had a unit there. So did 3 of Margaret's church friends. She stopped in front of it for a long moment, unsure why. An elderly man sat on a bench near the entrance, feeding pigeons from a small paper bag. He was entirely unaware that his home might soon be in danger. Claire watched him a while, something tightening in her chest. Whatever fear she carried about tomorrow, it suddenly felt smaller than the fear that man would carry if he ever learned the truth. By evening, she found herself back at the Wooden Spoon, sitting in a booth with Roz and Owen after closing. "You don't have to do this," Roz said. "Nobody would blame you for staying out of it." "I know," Claire said. "So why are you even considering it?" Claire looked down at her hands. "Because if I don't go," she said slowly, "nobody in that room will be looking out for this town. Not really." Owen leaned forward. "You think something's wrong with the deal," he said. It was not quite a question. "I don't know yet," Claire admitted, "but my father used to say people hide the truth in 2 places. In what they say too loudly, and in what they translate too carefully." Roz frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means sometimes the safest place to bury something is inside a language somebody else doesn't fully understand." The diner sat quiet around them, evening light fading outside the windows. "If there's something wrong in that contract," Claire went on, "I want to be the one standing in the room when it comes out, not hiding from it." Owen nodded slowly. "Then you go," he said. "And if you need anything from us, you ask." Claire called Felix Roth that night and told him yes. Chapter 21. The night before, Claire did not sleep much that Sunday night. She sat at her small kitchen table, her father's notebook open beside a legal pad borrowed from Owen's office drawer. She was not reviewing vocabulary. Her German was solid. Her French, her Italian, all of it was solid. What she needed to prepare was something else entirely. Her father used to say negotiations were rarely won or lost in the big, dramatic moments. They were won or lost in the small print, in the footnotes, in the appendices nobody bothered to read closely. Powerful men get lazy with detail, he told her once, reviewing a contract at their own kitchen table, years before any of this. They assume nobody in the room will catch it. "So what do you do?" young Claire had asked. "You read everything. Twice. And you never let anyone rush you past a page." She wrote that down now, at the top of her legal pad, in careful letters. Read everything. Twice. Never let them rush you. She thought of Sterling's cold eyes across the diner table, the way he had dismissed her as nothing more than a distraction. She thought of Maple Court, of Walter's booth by the window, of the whole quiet, ordinary town that had somehow become her home in just 6 short weeks. Before turning off the lamp, she did one more thing. She dug through an old shoebox of keepsakes until she found a business card, worn soft at the corners. for a woman named Louise Fenwick. Louise had been her father's closest colleague decades ago, a steady, sharp-minded woman who never once doubted Edward Ashford's integrity, even when the rest of the professional world turned away. Claire had not spoken to her in nearly 2 years. Her hand shook a little as she dialed, uncertain the number would even still work. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Louise Fenwick, Louise, it's Claire Ashford." A stunned pause followed. "Claire," Louise said, warmth flooding into her voice. "Goodness, it's been far too long." Claire explained everything quickly. The negotiation, the contract, the strange, gnawing feeling that history was somehow repeating itself. Louise listened without interrupting, the way good colleagues always do. "Whatever you find tomorrow," she said finally, "read it exactly as it's written, not as they explain it to you. The explanation is where powerful men hide their intentions. The words themselves rarely lie." "That's almost exactly what Dad used to say," Claire said, her throat tightening. "He taught me that too," Louise said, something fond entering her voice. "It seems he taught you well." They talked a while longer, old memories surfacing gently before saying goodbye. Claire hung up feeling steadier than she had in days. Whatever waited for her tomorrow, she would not be walking into that room entirely alone. Chapter 22. Inside the Millhaven Inn. The Millhaven Inn sat at the far end of Main Street, a converted farmhouse with white columns and a wide front porch. Its conference room usually hosted wedding rehearsals and overflow town council meetings. That Monday afternoon it looked almost unrecognizable. Long tables had been pushed together and covered with folders, laptops, and stacks of paper thick enough to make the wood groan. Claire arrived 15 minutes early, wearing the one blazer she owned, her father's notebook tucked into her bag out of habit more than need. Felix Roth greeted her at the door and shook her hand warmly. "Miss Ashford, thank you for coming. Herr Bergman will be pleased." Klaus Bergman rose from his seat as she entered, offering a small, respectful bow of his head. "Fräulein Ashford, it is good to see you again. Under better circumstances, I hope." "I hope so too, Herr Bergman." Across the room, Bradley Sterling sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, eyes cold. He did not stand, he did not offer his hand. "Didn't realize we'd hired the diner staff," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "You didn't hire her, Mr. Sterling," Roth said evenly. "Herr Bergman did, as is his right, under our agreement." Sterling's jaw worked silently. He said nothing further. Claire took her seat near Bergman's side of the table, her heart pounding beneath a calm exterior she had learned to wear a long time ago. She had translated difficult conversations before, years earlier, in rooms far more important than this one. None of them had ever felt quite this personal. Before the session began, Bergman leaned toward her, his voice low, meant only for her. "May I tell you something, Fräulein Ashford?" "Of course. My own father built a small furniture business from almost nothing," he said. "After difficult years, when very little in our country felt certain." Claire listened, unsure where this was headed. "He taught me that a contract is not simply numbers," Bergman went on. "It is a promise between people. When you break that promise quietly, in language nobody reads carefully, you have not simply made a shrewd deal." He paused. "You have broken something much older than any contract. Trust between neighbors. That's a rare thing to hear from a man in your position, Herr Bergman." He allowed himself a faint smile. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is simply rare for anyone to ask a man in my position what he actually believes." The room was filling now, chairs scraping, papers rustling. "Whatever happens today," he added, "I am grateful you are the one sitting beside me." Claire nodded, something steadying inside her chest. Chapter 23. The fine print. The negotiation began simply enough. Outside the tall windows, the last of the maple leaves drifted down onto the inn's front lawn, entirely indifferent to what was happening inside. Sterling's attorney, a sharp young man named Nathan Cobb, walked the table through the broad strokes of the agreement. Manufacturing capacity, supply timelines, investment percentages. Claire translated smoothly, her voice steady, falling back into old rhythms she had not used in years. It surprised her, a little, how quickly it returned to her. The rhythm of formal language, the careful pacing between sentences. Her father's advice ran quietly in the back of her mind the entire time. Read everything, twice. Never let them rush you. For nearly an hour, nothing seemed unusual. Midway through, Cobb passed around a supplier agreement written entirely in Spanish, a component contract with a manufacturer based outside Madrid. This one wasn't translated in advance, he admitted. We weren't expecting to need it today. Fräulein Ashford, Bergman said. Would you mind? Claire scanned the document once, then read the relevant terms aloud in clear, unhurried English, catching a minor discrepancy in the delivery penalty clause along the way. Roth made a note of it without comment. Bergman, too, seemed unusually attentive that afternoon, occasionally asking Claire to slow down or repeat a phrase, checking it against his own understanding. Sterling grew visibly impatient with the pace. We've covered this ground already, he said, checking his watch. Can we move things along? Herr Bergman prefers thoroughness to speed, Roth said. As do I, given the size of this agreement. Then Roth asked a question that shifted the room's temperature. Before we finalize, he said, Herr Bergman would like Miss Ashford to read through Section 12 aloud. In German, word for word. Cobb glanced toward Sterling, something flickering across his face. That section is largely boilerplate, Cobb said quickly. Standard property clauses. Then it should be simple enough to review, Bergman said pleasantly. Humor an old man's caution. Sterling's hand tightened around his pen. Fine, he said. Get on with it. Claire opened the document to Section 12. Her eyes moved down the page as she translated. The language dense with legal terminology, acquisition rights, redevelopment authority, site, consolidation. Then her eyes landed on a subheading near the bottom. Parcel Group C beneath it sat a short list of numbers and letters. Zoning codes. The kind most people would skim right past without a second thought. Claire was not most people. She had walked those streets every day for 6 weeks. She knew every building on Main Street, every address, the way you know the furniture in your own home. Her breath caught, just slightly. Chapter 24, Parcel Group C. Claire kept her voice even as she continued translating. Her mind, meanwhile, was moving fast. She recognized the first zoning code immediately. It belonged to the block that held the wooden spoon. The second code, she was almost certain, belonged to Maple Court Apartments. She paused at the edge of the page. Is something unclear, Fräulein Ashford? Bergman asked. She looked up. May I ask a clarifying question, Herr Bergman? Before I continue. Of course. She turned toward Nathan Cobb. Can you confirm what properties are included under Parcel Group C, in plain terms? Not zoning codes. Cobb hesitated. That information is available in the appendix, he said. It's simply administrative. Then it should be easy to answer, Claire said, calm and unhurried. What properties, Mr. Cobb? Sterling leaned forward, his voice hard. This isn't a courtroom, Miss Ashford. You're here to translate, not interrogate. I'm here to make sure Herr Bergman understands exactly what he is signing, Claire said. That is translation, Mr. Sterling, nothing more. The room went still. Bergman's eyes moved between Sterling and Claire, sharp and alert now. I would also like an answer, he said. What is Parcel Group C exactly? Silence stretched across the table. Finally, Roth reached for the appendix folder himself, flipping through it methodically. He found the page. He read it. His expression changed. He looked up at Bergman, then at Sterling, then finally at Claire. Perhaps, he said carefully, Miss Ashford should simply read it aloud, precisely as written. Chapter 25, What the Paper Really Said. Claire took the appendix page from Roth's outstretched hand. She scanned it once, silently to be certain. Then she began to read, translating each line into clear, careful German for Bergman, repeating the English aloud for the rest of the room to hear. Parcel Group C consists of the following addresses. She listed them one by one. The Wooden Spoon's address, the old bookstore, the barber shop. Then last on the list, Maple Court Apartments. These properties are designated for acquisition and full redevelopment under Phase 2 of the Main Street Revitalization Initiative. She looked up. In simpler terms, she said, this section grants Sterling Automotive the legal right to buy and then demolish these buildings, including an apartment complex currently housing elderly residents. The room erupted into overlapping voices. Bergman's face had gone pale, then hard with something close to anger. This was not explained to me, he said, low and controlled. The materials I reviewed described modernization, retail expansion on vacant lots. That is what the German's summary said, Herr Bergman, Claire told him. But it is not what the English contract actually authorizes. Sterling stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is a business deal, he snapped, not a charity. Land gets repurposed. That's how growth works. Even when the land has people living on it, Claire asked. They'll be compensated. More than fairly. Compensation doesn't replace a home a person has lived in for 30 years, Mr. Sterling. You know that. You just didn't expect anyone to say it out loud. Nathan Cobb shifted uncomfortably, saying nothing, eyes fixed on the table. There's a man who eats breakfast at that diner every morning, Claire continued, quieter now, but no less firm. He served this country for 4 years. He ran an honest business here for 35 more. You tried to take his booth away the very first night I met you. Now you're trying to take his neighbor's home. Sterling's expression flickered, something almost like discomfort crossing behind his eyes before the coldness returned. Sentiment doesn't build companies, Miss Ashford. No. But it's usually what companies destroy first, on their way to becoming something people no longer trust. Bergman raised a hand, quieting the room. I did not agree to displace elderly people from their homes, Mr. Sterling, he said. If that is what this contract truly does, we have a serious problem. There is a particular kind of courage that rarely makes headlines. It does not look like a shout or a fist raised in anger. It looks like a young woman reading a document exactly as it was written, in a quiet room, while powerful men wait for her to look away. Claire did not look away. Chapter 26, The Recess. Bergman called for a recess that afternoon, effective immediately. He asked Claire to remain nearby, in case further clarification was needed. She agreed, retreating to a quiet corner of the inn's front porch to wait. Before Sterling found her there, Bergman himself stepped outside first, closing the door behind him. Fräulein Ashford, I owe you my gratitude, not my irritation. I want to be certain you understand that. You don't owe me anything, Herr Bergman. I only read what was written. Many people would have found a reason not to, he said, a reason to look away. You did not. He studied the porch railing a moment, choosing his words. I have built my career trusting my instincts about people, he said. My instincts tell me you did not simply stumble into this skill of yours. Claire said nothing, unsure how much to share. Whatever your reasons are for being here, in this small town, he went on, I suspect they run deeper than waiting tables. They do, she admitted. He nodded, as if that confirmed something he had already suspected. Then I will simply say this. Whatever happens with this contract, you have already done something today that mattered greatly. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. He returned inside, leaving Claire alone with his words for a few quiet minutes. 10 minutes later, Bradley Sterling found her there. He closed the door behind him, his expression tightly controlled, though something colder moved underneath it. You just cost me a great deal of money. I translated the document accurately, Mr. Sterling. That's all I did. You could have skimmed past it. Most people would have. I'm not most people, Claire said. You said so yourself, the first night we met. He studied her, something calculating behind his eyes. You have no idea what you've just started, he said. None at all. Then explain it to me, plainly. His jaw tightened. Some things are bigger than a diner girl playing hero, he said. You'll understand that soon enough. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving Claire alone on the porch, the autumn wind cool against her face. She did not know exactly what he meant, but she had a feeling, deep in her chest, that she was about to find out. Chapter 27, Word reaches the council. News does not stay contained in a hotel conference room for long. Not in a town the size of Millhaven. By Monday evening, a reporter from the Millhaven Gazette had heard whispers of what happened at the negotiation session. His name was Peter Dunn. He normally covered high school sports and the county fair. He called Owen directly, hoping for a comment. I don't know the details, Peter, Owen said carefully. You'd have to talk to the people actually in that room. Is it true the deal involves tearing down Maple Court? That's what I'm hearing. Owen hesitated. I really can't say. But if it were true, I imagine a lot of people in this town would want to know about it. That was enough for Peter Dunn. By Tuesday morning, a short article ran on the front page of the Gazette, cautious in its wording but impossible to ignore. Questions raised over Main Street redevelopment plans. The headline read, The town council received 17 phone calls before lunchtime. That was an unusually large number for a body more accustomed to arguing over parking permits and pothole repairs. Council Chairwoman Linda Ossie called an emergency session for later that week, though it would not take place before the signing ceremony itself. Some council members were furious that details had leaked. Others were furious the details existed at all. Sterling, for his part, issued a brief statement. He called the reporting premature and misleading. He insisted all necessary disclosures would be made in due course. It did little to calm the growing unease spreading through Millhaven. Claire read the article twice, sitting alone in her small apartment, her stomach tight. She had wanted the truth to come out. She had not fully prepared herself for how it would feel, watching an entire town brace itself around something she had helped uncover. Chapter 28, The Phone Call to Owen. That Tuesday evening, not long after the Gazette article had made its way through half the town, the phone rang at the Wooden Spoon just after closing. Owen answered it alone, the diner empty except for the hum of the refrigerator and the quiet clink of Roz washing the last of the dishes. The voice on the line belonged to Nathan Cobb. "Mr. Whitfield, I wanted to follow up regarding your property lease." Owen's stomach tightened. "What about it?" "Sterling Automotive is conducting a review of all commercial leases along Main Street," Cobb said, "as part of the upcoming redevelopment considerations. My lease isn't up for another 2 years." "Leases can always be renegotiated early," Cobb said, "especially when a tenant's staff behaves in ways that complicate ongoing business relationships." Owen's grip tightened on the receiver. "Are you talking about Claire?" "I'm simply saying," Cobb replied, unbothered, "that a business owner in your position might want to think carefully about who represents his establishment, particularly this week." The line went quiet for a moment. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Cobb?" "Of course not," Cobb said pleasantly. "I'm simply offering some friendly advice. Mr. Sterling values loyalty. He remembers who stands with him and who doesn't." He ended the call without waiting for a response. Owen stood there, staring at the receiver. Roz walked over slowly, drying her hands on a towel. "Owen, what is it?" He did not answer right away. "I think," he finally said, "we might be in more trouble than I realized." Chapter 29 ripples through Maple Court. By Tuesday morning, word had begun spreading through Millhaven. Nobody knew all the details yet, but rumors moved fast, and fear moved faster. At Maple Court Apartments, residents found unfamiliar notices taped to their doors that morning, vague language about a pending lease review. Nothing definitive, nothing they could challenge directly, but enough to worry them badly. Dot Pruitt, a widow in her 70s who had lived there for nearly 2 decades, called Walter in a panic that afternoon. "They're saying it's because of that waitress," she told him, her voice tight with fear. "The one who caused trouble with Sterling. Now we might lose our homes over it." Walter, sitting in his usual booth at the Wooden Spoon, felt something heavy settle in his chest. "Dot, Claire didn't cause this. Sterling did. Maybe. But it wasn't happening before she showed up, was it?" Walter did not have a good answer for that. Not one that would calm her fear anyway. He hung up slowly and sat with it a long moment. That evening, he walked the 4 blocks to Maple Court himself, despite the cold, and knocked on Dot's door. "Walter," she said, surprised. "You didn't need to come all this way." "I did, actually. I've known you 30 years, Dot. I wasn't about to let you sit here scared without hearing the whole story." He told her everything. The diner, the mockery, the contract and Parcel Group C, and what Claire had done in that room to protect people she barely knew. Dot listened quietly, hands folded in her lap. "I didn't know all that," she admitted. A door creaked open across the hall. Dot's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Vivian Ostrander, poked her head out, drawn by the sound of voices. "Is that Walter Higgins out here at this hour?" Vivian asked, wrapping a cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Everything all right?" "Come in and hear it for yourself," Dot said, waving her over. "Turns out, we've been getting the story backward all week." By the time Walter finally left, both women had a much clearer picture of what had actually happened at that negotiation table, and who had actually been trying to help them. "Most folks don't," Walter said. "Fear spreads faster than facts, always has." She was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," she finally said, "for what I said. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to her if you get the chance. She's the one standing between you and losing your home." Word of conversations like that one traveled quickly through town. By Tuesday evening, some of the regulars who once greeted Claire warmly now offered only tight, uncertain smiles. A few avoided the diner altogether. Nobody said anything cruel to her directly, but the silence in its own way said plenty. Claire felt it settle over her like a familiar coat, one she had hoped never to wear again. Not everyone stayed silent, though. Walter made a point that week of sitting at the counter instead of his booth. That way, he could talk with Claire directly during her shift, in plain view of anyone who cared to notice. It was a small thing. It mattered more than he probably realized. Chapter 30. Owen's decision. Owen did not sleep well that Tuesday night. He sat up late in his small kitchen, staring at old photographs of his late wife behind the counter of the wooden spoon, remembering the summer they met. He got up one, in the small hours, and pulled her old apron from the drawer behind the register, just to hold something that still smelled faintly of her, even after all these years. He remembered her laugh, the way it used to carry clear across a crowded dining room. He remembered promising her, the week before she passed, that he would keep the place going, no matter what it cost him. He thought about the mortgage on the building, about Roz's rent, about the 16 years he had spent building something worth protecting. He also thought about Claire, standing in that negotiation room. She had refused to look away from something ugly, even though looking away would have been so much easier. He wondered what his wife would have told him to do. He suspected he already knew the answer, and that it was not the one he was about to choose. By Wednesday morning, he had made a decision he hated. He found Claire before her shift began, his face drawn and tired. "Claire, I need to talk to you." She could tell immediately, from his eyes, what was coming. "You don't have to explain, Owen." "I do, actually. You deserve that much." He sat down across from her in an empty booth. "Sterling's people are threatening my lease," he said. "If I don't distance myself from you, at least for now, I could lose this place. Everything my father built. Everything my wife loved." "I understand," Claire said, and she meant it. "It's not fair," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "You did the right thing in that room yesterday. The exact right thing. And now you're the one paying for it." "That happens sometimes," Claire said, managing a tired smile. "Doing right and being safe aren't always the same choice." Owen reached across the table and gripped her hand briefly. "This isn't goodbye," he said firmly. "The moment this settles, you have a job here. I promise you that, I know." She gathered her things quietly, said a soft goodbye to Roz, who hugged her tightly at the door, tears standing in her eyes. Walter, sitting in his booth, watched her go with a heavy heart. There was nothing left to say that would fix it. Claire stepped outside into the cold morning air, unemployed, uncertain, and further from safety than she had felt in a very long time. Walter caught up with her before she reached the corner, moving faster than a man his age had any business moving. "You didn't think I'd let you walk off without a word, did you?" he said, a little out of breath. Claire managed a small, tired smile. "I wasn't sure." "I've got something for you," Walter said. "Not much, but it might matter." He pressed a small, faded business card into her palm. It belonged to an auto parts distributor, decades old, the ink nearly gone. "Found it cleaning out my old shop files last year," he said. "Never threw much away. Company went under years back. But I remember the fellow who used to represent them, back when he was young and hungry. Always talked about bigger things than car parts." Claire looked at the faded lettering, uncertain what she was seeing. "His name was Sterling," Walter said. "Bradley Sterling. Long before he had any money to speak of." Claire's breath caught. "Might be nothing," he added, "but you strike me as someone who appreciates an old piece of paper that refuses to disappear." She held the card carefully, the way she held her father's notebook. "Thank you, Walter," she said, her throat tight. "Go on now," he said, his eyes a little glassy. "Get some rest. This town isn't done fighting for you yet." Chapter 31. Margaret's Discovery. While Claire packed her few things that Wednesday afternoon, Margaret Hale sat alone in her small home, surrounded by boxes of old academic files she had not opened in years. Dust rose in slow drifting columns through the afternoon light every time she pulled another folder loose. Her cat, unimpressed by the disruption, watched from the top of the bookshelf with visible disapproval. She was searching for something specific, a name, a thread. Anything that might explain the strange, gnawing feeling she had carried since seeing Sterling's face up close. It took her most of the day. Margaret had spent her career around scholars. They traded old conference programs and symposium records the way other people traded family photographs. She started with the years just before Edward Ashford's career ended, working forward slowly, the way she once trained graduate students to work. Finally, buried in a folder of old conference materials, she found it. A photocopied business directory, listing attendees from an international trade symposium. The same symposium where Edward Ashford had once served as lead interpreter, years before his career collapsed. Near the bottom of a page listing junior associates from a now-defunct consulting firm, one name caught her eye. B. Sterling. Margaret's hands went still. It could be nothing. A coincidence. A common enough surname. But something about it settled into her chest like a stone. She thought of Edward Ashford's ruined career, of the falsified documents that ended it, documents that had originated, according to old rumors, from a young, ambitious associate eager to make a name for himself. She thought of Sterling's cold, calculating eyes across the negotiation table. Wanting more than a hunch, she picked up the phone. She called an old colleague from her university days, a retired archivist named Professor Owusu. He still kept in careful touch with several former students working in trade law. "Margaret," he said warmly, once she explained her question. "That's a name from a long time ago. Do you remember anything specific about him?" A pause followed. "Only that he left the firm rather suddenly," he said. "Not long after the Ashford scandal broke. Nobody ever asked too many questions about why." Margaret closed her eyes. "Thank you. That's more than I expected to find." She dialed Claire's number next, her fingers unsteady. "Claire, I need to see you tonight. I think I may have found something important." "What is it?" Margaret glanced down at the old photocopy in her hands. "I'm not certain yet. But I think the past may be closer than either of us realized." "Margaret," Claire said slowly, "I think I might have something too." She told Margaret about Walter and the faded business card and the name written across it in old, careful lettering. A long silence followed. "Bring it with you tonight," Margaret said at last, her voice unsteady. "I believe we may be looking at the same thread from two very different directions." Chapter 32. What Isn't Said Out Loud. Claire arrived at Margaret's small house just after dark, her few boxes of belongings still sitting unpacked in her rented room. Margaret led her to the kitchen table, where the old photocopy lay waiting. Claire set Walter's faded business card down beside it. Two old pieces of paper, decades apart, resting side by side under the kitchen light. Margaret adjusted her glasses and looked between them. "Same name," she said. "Same rough time period. An associate at a struggling firm, then a supplier representative for auto parts not long after. A man reinventing himself," Claire said, piece by piece, until nobody could trace where he started. "It's not proof," Margaret cautioned. "Not the kind that would hold up anywhere official. Not yet. But it's a thread." "Yes," Margaret agreed. "It's a thread." Claire read the name slowly. "B. Sterling. It might still be nothing," Margaret said. "I want to be honest about that. It's a common enough name. But you don't think it's nothing?" Margaret sighed. "No, I don't." Claire sat down slowly, the weight of the last 2 days pressing on her shoulders. "If this is true," she said, "then the man who's threatening this entire town is the same man who destroyed my father. We don't know that yet, not for certain, but it fits. It fits too well." Margaret reached across the table and covered Claire's hand with her own, the way she had that very first night. "Whatever the truth turns out to be," she said, "you are not facing it alone this time. Not like your father was." Claire looked up at her, eyes glassy but steady. "Thank you," she said. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling gently against the old window panes. Somewhere across town, the signing ceremony crept closer with each passing hour. Less than a full day remained now. By this time tomorrow evening, Sterling and Bergman would either sign that contract, or they would not. Claire thought of her father's voice, patient and steady, echoing across the years. "Truth has patience," he used to say. "It can wait a long time. But it never simply disappears." She hoped, more than she had hoped for anything in a very long while, that he had been right. Because if he was, the truth was finally running out of places left to hide. Margaret rose and put the kettle on again, the small, ordinary gesture somehow steadying them both. "Get some rest tonight if you can," she said. "Tomorrow is going to ask a great deal of you." "I know," Claire said. She gathered the old photocopy carefully, folding it into her father's notebook for safekeeping, and stepped out into the cold Millhaven night. Above her, the stars were sharp and clear, the way they only seemed to be in small towns far from city light. She thought of Owen's apron folded in that drawer, of Walter's booth, empty now until morning, of an old man on a bench somewhere near Maple Court, feeding pigeons who had no idea their home was in danger. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things a man like Sterling had never learned to value, and likely never would. Somewhere out there, a man who had wronged her father once was about to finish what he started, unless something or someone stopped him first. 12 years earlier, he had walked away from a ruined man's career without so much as a backward glance, confident nobody would ever connect the pieces. 12 years is a long time to feel safe. It is not, however, forever. Chapter 33. The notebook's secret. Claire could not sleep that night. She doubted she would sleep again until this was over. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear Margaret moving quietly through the house. Unable to settle either, the soft clink of a kettle being filled and set aside again. She sat at Margaret's kitchen table long after midnight, her father's notebook open in front of her for what felt like the 100th time. She had read it as a keepsake before, a comfort, a way of hearing his voice again. She had never read it as evidence. Now she turned each page slowly, deliberately, searching for anything she might have missed. Most of the notebook held exactly what she expected. Vocabulary lists, grammar notes, small phrases in 7 languages gathered over a lifetime of careful study. But near the back, tucked between 2 ordinary pages, she found something different. A page covered in dense, hurried handwriting, not vocabulary, notes. Fragments of a phone call, written partly in Russian, partly in Arabic, as if her father had been taking dictation from his own racing thoughts. Claire remembered, suddenly, a conversation from years earlier. She had asked him once why he sometimes wrote important things in other languages. Even simple grocery lists occasionally slipped into French or Italian. Habit, he told her, smiling. When you work around sensitive information, you learn to make things slightly harder to read at a glance. Not impossible, just harder, enough to buy yourself a moment, if the wrong person ever looks over your shoulder. At the time, it had seemed like a charming quirk, a professional's careful instinct. Now, sitting in Margaret's kitchen, Claire understood it differently. Her father had been protecting something, or someone, perhaps even protecting the truth itself. Tucked safely inside languages he trusted most people around him would never bother to learn. Her pulse quickened. She translated the fragments carefully, piecing together broken sentences. Young associate, ambitious, submitted altered exhibits under firm letterhead. Confronted him privately, he denied everything. Something is very wrong here. Below that, in smaller writing, almost an afterthought, watch this one, BS. Claire's hands would not stop shaking. Margaret, she whispered, I think my father knew before any of this happened to him. He suspected someone. Margaret leaned over the page, adjusting her glasses. BS, she read aloud. Bradley Sterling. He must have confronted him, Claire said, before the accusations against Dad even began. Which means, Margaret said slowly, your father wasn't simply an unlucky bystander who happened to get framed. She looked up, her expression grave. He was a threat, she said. Sterling didn't ruin your father by accident, Claire. He did it to protect himself. Chapter 34. A call to Louise. It was nearly 1 in the morning when Claire picked up the phone again. Louise Fenwick answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep, but immediately alert once she caught the urgency in Claire's tone. Claire, what's happened? Claire explained everything quickly. The notebook, the Russian and Arabic notes, the initials BS, written beside a warning her father had never gotten the chance to act on. A long silence followed. I always wondered, Louise finally said, why your father grew so cautious those last few months. He never told me why. Do you have anything from back then? Any files, any records, anything at all? I kept everything, Louise said, every scrap. Call it stubbornness. Call it not being able to let go of an injustice. Claire heard rustling on the other end of the line, drawers opening, papers shifting. I have a box in my basement, Louise said. Old case files, internal mail correspondence from that period. I never had the heart to throw any of it away. Could you look through it? Tonight, if you can manage it. Give me until morning, Louise said firmly. If there's something in there, Claire, I will find it. I owe your father that much. They said their goodbyes, and Claire set the phone down, her heart pounding somewhere between hope and dread. Now what? She asked. Margaret poured them both a fresh cup of tea. Now we wait, she said, and we prepare for tomorrow regardless of what she finds. Chapter 35. Why it mattered to Margaret. While they waited, Claire found herself curious about something. Margaret, why does this matter so much to you? You barely knew my father. Margaret turned her teacup slowly in her hands before answering. Early in my career, I watched a colleague of mine get pushed out of the university, accused of plagiarism that wasn't his. The real culprit was a younger, more ambitious professor hungry for his position. What happened to him? He never fully recovered, Margaret said. Lost his confidence. Left academia within a year. I always regretted not speaking up more forcefully at the time. I was young myself, afraid of jeopardizing my own position. She met Claire's eyes. I promised myself, after that, I would never stay quiet again when I saw the same pattern repeating, she said. Ambition dressed up as merit, cruelty dressed up as progress. So when you saw my father's photograph and suspected something similar had happened to him, I saw a chance to finally keep that promise, Margaret said. Better late than never, I suppose. Claire reached over and squeezed her hand. I'm glad you did, she said. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the kitchen clock ticking softly on the wall, the whole town sleeping around them, unaware of what the coming day would bring. Get some rest if you can, Margaret finally said. Tomorrow we'll need every ounce of steadiness we can manage. Claire nodded, though she suspected, correctly, that neither of them would sleep much at all. Chapter 36, Sterling moves to block. Word travels strangely in a small town, sometimes slower than expected, sometimes far too fast. By Thursday morning, whispers had reached Bradley Sterling that Claire Ashford was digging into his past. He did not know exactly what she had found, but he knew enough to be worried. He called Nathan Cobb into his hotel suite before dawn, his expression tight and cold. The suite still smelled of the previous night's room service, an untouched breakfast tray sitting cold on the desk beside a laptop full of unread messages. I want her kept away from the ceremony tonight, Sterling said, whatever it takes. Cobb hesitated. On what grounds exactly? She's not officially part of anything anymore. Owen let her go. Then make sure it stays that way, Sterling said. Call the venue. Call the council office. I don't care how you manage it. Cobb shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. Mr. Sterling, if she really has something on you, blocking her from the ceremony isn't going to make it disappear. Sterling's eyes went hard. Are you working for me, Cobb, or for her? I'm working for you, Cobb said. I'm simply saying there might be a smarter way to handle this than brute force. I don't want smart. Sterling snapped. I want it handled. Cobb left the room without another word, his jaw tight, something uneasy settling behind his professional composure. He sat in his car in the hotel parking lot for a long moment before starting the engine, staring at nothing in particular. He thought about law school, years ago, and the version of himself who once believed the work would always feel clean. He thought about the negotiation room and the way Claire Ashford had simply told the truth, plainly, without flinching, while everyone around her calculated angles. He made the calls Sterling demanded. Linda Ossie, when Cobb reached her that morning, listened politely to his carefully worded request. Mr. Cobb, she said once he finished, Town Hall is a public building. This is a public ceremony concerning public interests. I am not in the business of deciding who may or may not attend. Mr. Sterling simply feels her presence could be disruptive. Then Mr. Sterling is welcome to raise that concern with the full council, on the record, at the appropriate time, Linda said crisply. Good day, Mr. Cobb. She hung up before he could respond further. For the first time in years working for Bradley Sterling, Nathan Cobb found himself hoping quietly that they would fail. Chapter 37. The file arrives. Claire and Margaret were back at the kitchen table. By 7 that morning, the notebook and the old business card spread out before them. When the email finally arrived, Louise Fenwick had found something. The scanned document loaded slowly on Margaret's ancient laptop, the two women leaning close, holding their breath. It was an internal memo dated decades earlier, from the same consulting firm listed on the old business directory. A formal complaint, filed by a senior colleague, raising concerns about a junior associate named Bradley Sterling. The memo described altered translation exhibits submitted during an international trade dispute, exhibits that had been quietly used months later to discredit a respected interpreter named Edward Ashford. The complaint had been filed, and then mysteriously it had gone nowhere. No investigation, no consequences. Sterling had resigned from the firm shortly afterward, the matter simply fading into old paperwork. Nobody thought to revisit, until now. Claire read the document 3 times, tears blurring her vision by the third pass. This is it, she whispered. This is actual proof. Not a hunch. Not a coincidence. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. Your father's name can finally be cleared, she said. After all these years. The phone rang again a few minutes later. It was Louise, her voice thick with emotion. I read it a dozen times before sending it, she said. I wanted to be certain before I got your hopes up. Thank you, Claire managed. You have no idea what this means. I have some idea, Louise said. I watched your father carry that injustice for years, Claire. Quietly, without ever once raising his voice about it, even when he had every right to. That sounds like him, Claire said, a small, tearful laugh escaping her. Go finish what he started, Louise said firmly. You have my full support and my testimony if anyone asks for it. Claire looked up at Margaret. We have less than 12 hours, she said. We need to figure out exactly how to use this. Chapter 38, Walter's Call to Action. While Claire and Margaret studied Louise's document, Walter Higgins was making calls of his own. He started with Dot Pruitt, who answered on the first ring, still carrying guilt from their conversation earlier that week. Walter, is everything all right? Tonight matters, Dot, he said simply. More than you know. I need you and anyone else at Maple Court who's willing to be at Town Hall for that signing ceremony. What's going on? The truth, Walter said. Finally, all of it, coming out at once. Dot did not hesitate. I'll make some calls, she said. We'll be there. Walter spent the rest of the morning doing the same, quietly, methodically, the way he once fixed cars that other mechanics had given up on. He called Owen next. You closing up early tonight, Walter said. Or do I need to come stand in your dining room and convince you? Already planning on it, Owen said. Roz and I talked it over first thing this morning. Wasn't really a decision once we thought about it clearly. Good man. I should have made that decision faster the first time, Walter, Owen admitted. I let fear talk me out of doing right by that girl, not making that mistake twice. Walter called Roz next, who cried a little on the phone before agreeing without hesitation. By early afternoon, word had spread through Millhaven's older residents in the same quiet, careful way it always did. Not through headlines, through phone calls, through neighbors checking on neighbors. Whatever happened at Town Hall that evening, Bradley Sterling was not going to face an empty room. He was going to face the whole town he had underestimated, from the very first night he walked through its door. Chapter 39, the morning of Felix Roth, called Claire just after noon, his voice careful and measured. Miss Ashford, I understand there have been some efforts to discourage your attendance this evening. I'd heard something similar. Herr Bergman was quite firm on the matter, Roth said. He would like you present. Officially, as an independent observer, given your prior involvement in reviewing the contract documents. Relief washed through her. Thank you, Mr. Roth. There is something else, he added. Overnight, our legal team discovered additional irregularities in the supplementary investment filings. A holding company registered in Portugal, connected to funds used for the Main Street acquisitions. What kind of irregularities? Documents we cannot fully verify without a fluent reader, Roth said. Herr Bergman specifically asked whether you might be willing to review them before this evening. Claire thought of her father, of the 7 languages he had given her. Each one was a small key to a door someone else had hoped would stay locked. Send them over, she said. I'll have a look. The documents arrived by email within the hour. Claire spread them across Margaret's kitchen table, working through the dense Portuguese legal language line by line. It took her nearly 2 hours to untangle it fully. The holding company, registered in Lisbon, existed almost entirely on paper. A shell arrangement, moving money through several accounts before it ever touched Sterling's official filings. The structure was designed with a specific purpose in mind. If the Main Street redevelopment collapsed for any reason, the financial losses would land almost entirely on local lenders and the town itself. Sterling's own exposure remained carefully, deliberately minimal. Claire sat back, rubbing her tired eyes. He wasn't just planning to take people's homes, she said. He built this whole thing so that if it fell apart, this town would be the one left holding the wreckage. Margaret shook her head slowly. Some men build empires, she said. Others simply build very elaborate excuses for taking what was never theirs. Claire began organizing her notes, translating key passages into clear, simple English. She was preparing to explain all of it, plainly, to a room full of people. People who deserved to understand exactly what had nearly happened to their town. Chapter 40, the gathering at Maple Court. At 5 o'clock that evening, a small crowd began forming in the courtyard outside Maple Court Apartments. Dot Pruitt stood at the center of it, clipboard in hand, checking names. She managed it the way she once ran the church bake sale committee. Quiet, unshakable efficiency. We carpool, she announced. Nobody drives alone tonight. Nobody sits alone tonight either. An elderly man named Frank Delaney, the same man Claire had once seen feeding pigeons outside the building, shuffled forward leaning on his cane. Never been to a town council meeting in my life, he admitted. Didn't figure I had much reason to before. You've got reason tonight, Dot said, helping him toward a waiting car. One by one, doors opened along the courtyard. Neighbors who had lived beside each other for years, sometimes barely exchanging more than a wave, gathered together now with a shared, unspoken purpose. Walter arrived just before they left, having stopped by to make sure everyone had a ride. You didn't have to come all this way, Walter, Dot said. Wouldn't have missed it, he said. This is what neighbors do when it matters. The small caravan pulled away from Maple Court a few minutes later, a modest procession of aging sedans and one borrowed minivan, carrying 12 residents toward Town Hall. None of them were entirely certain what the evening would bring. All of them had decided together that they would face it as one. Chapter 41. Arriving at Town Hall Millhaven, Town Hall sat at the center of the town square, a solid brick building with tall white columns and a bell tower that had chimed the hour faithfully for over a century. By 6 that evening, the building's front steps were already crowded. Reporters from the Gazette mingled with council members. Curious townsfolk gathered along the sidewalk, drawn by rumors that something unusual was about to happen. Claire arrived just before 6:30, wearing the same blazer she had worn to the negotiation session. Her hands were steady. Her stomach was not. Margaret walked beside her, one hand resting lightly on Claire's arm. Whatever happens in there, she said, you have already done something your father would be immeasurably proud of, simply by walking through those doors tonight. Claire nodded, unable to trust her voice just yet. Walter met them at the entrance, offering his arm to Margaret with old-fashioned courtesy. Inside, the main hall had been arranged with rows of folding chairs facing a small stage. A long table stood ready for the formal signing itself. Owen and Roz were already seated near the front, having closed the diner 2 hours early. Dot Pruitt sat beside them, along with a dozen other residents from Maple Court, their faces a mixture of nerves and quiet determination. Bradley Sterling stood near the stage, shaking hands with council members, his public smile firmly in place. He spotted Claire the moment she walked in. His smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes went cold and sharp. Walter leaned close to Claire as they found their seats. Whatever happens in there tonight, he said, you already won something bigger than that contract. Don't forget that. Whichever way it goes. Claire squeezed his hand, unable to find words steady enough to answer him. Near the front, Klaus Bergman caught Claire's eye across the crowded hall. He offered her a small, respectful nod, the same gesture he had given her that very first night at the Wooden Spoon. It felt, somehow, like a lifetime ago. Chapter 42. The ceremony begins. Council Chairwoman Linda Ossie opened the evening with brief remarks about economic growth and community partnership, her tone practiced and polished. Sterling took the podium next, speaking confidently about jobs, investment, and a bright future for Millhaven's Main Street. This partnership represents the single largest investment this town has seen in a generation, he said, his voice smooth. Progress requires vision. Tonight, Millhaven takes a bold step forward. A polite smattering of applause followed, though it felt thinner than the enthusiasm such an announcement might normally draw. Claire listened carefully, her hand resting on her bag, on the documents that told a very different story. Klaus Bergman sat near the front, his expression unusually reserved for a man about to sign a deal worth so much money. When Sterling finished speaking, Felix Roth rose from his seat. Before we proceed to signing, he said, his voice carrying through the hall, Herr Bergman has requested a brief review of certain outstanding concerns. In the interest of full transparency, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Sterling's jaw tightened, though his public smile held steady. I believe we addressed those concerns already, he said. Not entirely, Bergman said, rising to stand beside Roth. And given what has come to light since, I believe the people of this town deserve a complete accounting. Not a partial one. He turned toward Claire. For those who do not know her, he said, addressing the hall, this is Miss Claire Ashford, a waitress at the Wooden Spoon. Also, as it happens, a woman fluent in German, French, Spanish, Italian, Russian, Arabic, and Portuguese. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd, several council members exchanging glances. 7 languages, Bergman continued, and not one of them used, in all the time I have known her, to deceive anyone. I thought that fact deserved saying aloud before she says anything else. Miss Ashford, he said, would you join us, please? Chapter 43. Claire steps forward. Claire rose slowly, her heart pounding, and made her way to the front of the hall. Her footsteps echoed against the old wooden floor, the same floor that had hosted wedding announcements and pancake breakfasts, and every ordinary town meeting for 100 years. She glanced back once toward Margaret and Walter, toward Owen and Roz, toward the small, determined cluster of Maple Court residents seated together near the middle rows. Every one of them met her eyes and nodded, small and steady. It was the way people do when they want you to know you are not standing there alone. The room had gone remarkably quiet. Thank you, Herr Bergman, she said, and took a steadying breath. She began simply, walking the council and the gathered town through what she had discovered during the negotiation session. Parcel Group C, the addresses hidden inside zoning codes, Maple Court Apartments, and the Wooden Spoon, quietly marked for demolition behind carefully translated language. Gasps rippled through the crowd, particularly among the Maple Court residents who had not heard the full details until this moment. Linda Osei leaned forward at the council table, her expression hardening. Miss Ashford, are you telling this council that these demolition provisions were deliberately obscured from Herr Bergman's own legal review? Yes, Claire said simply. The German language summary he was given described modernization and retail expansion. The English legal document, the one that actually carries binding authority, describes something considerably more severe. That is a very serious accusation. It is a very serious document, Claire replied. Sterling stood rigid near the stage, his hands clenched at his sides. This is old news, he said tightly. We've already discussed this at length. There's more, Mr. Sterling, Claire said, calm and unhurried. She held up a folder. Overnight, Herr Bergman's legal team discovered a holding company registered in Portugal, she continued, connected to funds used for these very acquisitions. She began translating the document aloud, her voice clear and steady. The filing revealed a shell arrangement. It funneled investment money through a chain of shell entities. This obscured exactly how much of Sterling's own capital was actually at risk in the deal. It also hid how much was borrowed against properties he did not yet legally own. In simpler terms, Claire said, looking directly at the council, Mr. Sterling structured this deal so that if it collapsed, the financial damage would fall almost entirely on this town, not on him. A council member near the front, an older man named Harold Boyce, half rose from his seat. Is that legal? He demanded, directing the question toward Sterling. Technically, Sterling said, his composure cracking, every filing was submitted correctly. Technically correct, Roth said, is not the same thing as honest, Mr. Sterling. The hall erupted into overlapping voices. Linda Osei banged a small gavel, calling for order, her expression thunderous. Chapter 44. The proof about her father. When the room finally quieted, Claire took another breath. What she was about to say next was not about contracts or shell companies or zoning codes. It was about her father. There is one more thing, she said, softer now, though it carried clearly through the silent hall. Something personal. Something I believe this town deserves to hear as well. She told them about Edward Ashford, a respected interpreter, once trusted with sensitive international negotiations. A man falsely accused of falsifying documents decades earlier. His career and eventually his health destroyed by accusations that were never true. My father spent his whole life believing that words matter, Claire said. That understanding each other truly and carefully was the closest thing to peace most of us ever get to build. Her voice wavered before steadying again. He lost everything because someone decided the truth was inconvenient, she continued. He never got to clear his name before he passed. I have carried that unfairness with me every day since. She told them about a young, ambitious associate at a consulting firm who had submitted altered exhibits during a trade dispute, exhibits later used to discredit her father entirely. She held up Louise Fenwick's document, her hands steady despite the tears in her eyes. That associate's name, she said, was Bradley Sterling. The silence in the hall was absolute. Sterling's face had gone pale, his composure visibly cracking now. This is absurd, he said, though his voice lacked its usual force. Ancient history. Completely unrelated, is it? Margaret rose from her seat, her voice firm despite her age. Because I have spent my career studying documentation, Mr. Sterling, and this memo is remarkably specific for something so unrelated. Walter rose next, standing slowly but steadily. I kept an old business card of yours for over a decade, son, he said. Never knew why until this week. Guess some things just wait for the right moment to matter. One by one, others in the hall began to stand. Owen, Roz, Dot Pruitt, a dozen residents from Maple Court who had gathered that evening, not fully understanding what they would witness, but understanding now completely. Chapter 45, Sterling's Unraveling. Bradley Sterling stood alone near the stage, the weight of the entire room pressing against him. For one brief moment, something flickered across his face. It almost resembled the young, hungry associate he had once been, decades ago, before ambition hardened into something colder. Whatever that flicker was, it did not last. None of this proves anything, he said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. A memo, an old business card, circumstantial nonsense. Perhaps, Klaus Bergman said, stepping forward. But it is enough doubt, Mr. Sterling, that I cannot in good conscience sign anything bearing your name tonight. He turned to address the hall. I came to this town hoping to build something lasting, he said. Instead, I find a man who builds his fortune by taking from people too vulnerable to fight back. That is not a partnership I wish any part of. He looked directly at Sterling. I am withdrawing from this agreement, effective immediately, he said. And I will be forwarding these documents to the appropriate authorities for review. Sterling's mouth opened, then closed again, no words emerging. Nathan Cobb, standing near the back of the hall, stepped forward at last. For what it's worth, he said, low but audible, I raised concerns about several of these filings weeks ago. I have my own records of those conversations should investigators require them. Sterling turned to stare at him, something between betrayal and disbelief crossing his face. You're supposed to work for me. I work within the law, Mr. Sterling, Cobb said. That was always the arrangement, not the other way around. Linda Ossie rose from her seat, her expression resolute. This council will be opening a formal review of all pending Sterling automotive property transactions, she announced, effective immediately. No further acquisitions will proceed until that review is complete. Bergman turned back to Claire, his expression softening. Fraulein Ashford, he said. I believe I owe your father an apology he can no longer hear, so instead I will offer it to you. You don't owe him anything, Herr Bergman, Claire said. You were the one who insisted on the truth tonight, when it would have been easier not to. Perhaps, but it was you who found it and carried it here, at considerable cost to yourself. Near the back of the hall, Frank Delaney sat quietly in his seat. Tears ran freely down his weathered face, one hand pressed against his chest. He would keep his home. For him in that moment, nothing else in the entire hall mattered quite as much. Chapter 46, The Town Stands Up. The hall erupted into motion, voices rising, chairs scraping, the formal ceremony collapsing entirely into something far more chaotic and far more honest. Reporters scrambled for quotes. Council members conferred urgently among themselves. Dot Pruitt made her way through the crowd until she reached Claire, her eyes wet with tears. I'm so sorry, she said, for what I said before, for doubting you. You don't need to apologize, Claire said. You were scared. That's not a sin. Still, Dot said, taking Claire's hand firmly in both of hers. Thank you for fighting for people you barely knew. Frank Delaney made his way over slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, Peter Dunn's photographer capturing the moment without either of them noticing. Young lady, he said, his voice unsteady. I've lived in that building 11 years. Never thought I'd have to worry about losing it. Not at my age. You won't lose it, Mr. Delaney, Claire said, taking his free hand. Not if I have anything to say about it. Seems you had quite a lot to say about it tonight, he said, a small smile breaking through his tears. Thank you. Walter approached next, his eyes bright. Your father would be proud, he said. I never knew the man, but I know his daughter. That tells me plenty. Claire's composure finally broke, tears slipping free as Margaret wrapped an arm around her shoulders. You did it, Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. You truly did it. Across the hall, Bradley Sterling was quietly, hastily gathering his things, his associates avoiding eye contact as reporters closed in with questions he clearly had no intention of answering. He left through a side entrance alone, without a single person in that hall moving to stop him, or particularly caring to. Some kinds of defeat require no further punishment. Being finally, completely seen is often enough. Chapter 47. The council meets. The emergency council session, Linda Osei had promised, took place 3 days later, in the very same hall. This time there was no ceremony atmosphere, no folding chairs arranged for celebration, only careful, deliberate business. Harold Boyce opened the discussion, reading aloud from a prepared statement about the council's responsibility to protect vulnerable residents from predatory development practices. Dot Pruitt spoke on behalf of Maple Court's tenants, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "We're not asking for anything special," she told the council. "Just the right to grow old in the homes we already have. That shouldn't require a fight. But if it does, we're grateful this town was willing to have it." Frank Delaney spoke briefly too, his cane tapping softly against the floor as he made his way to the small podium. "I've paid my rent on time for 11 years, he said. "Never missed once. Seems to me that ought to count for something, when powerful men come looking to take what isn't theirs." Vivian Ostrander, the retired schoolteacher from down the hall at Maple Court, stood as well, offering a brief, articulate account of how quickly fear had spread through the building once the notices appeared. Peter Dunn sat in the front row taking careful notes, his article on the council session already forming in his head before the meeting had even ended. The council voted unanimously that evening to establish new protections for Millhaven's long-term residential leases. These protections particularly covered elderly tenants, making it significantly harder for any future developer to attempt what Sterling had nearly accomplished. Claire watched from the back row, Margaret and Walter beside her, feeling something settle quietly into place inside her chest. It was not the same as clearing her father's name, but it felt in its own way like exactly the kind of victory he would have appreciated most. Quiet, practical, built to last. Chapter 48. What came after. The days that followed moved quickly. State investigators opened a formal inquiry into Sterling Automotive's financial dealings, both in Millhaven and in several other towns where similar acquisitions had quietly begun. Nathan Cobb, true to his word, provided detailed records of his internal warnings Sterling had repeatedly dismissed. It went a long way toward establishing exactly how deliberate the deception had been. Klaus Bergman's legal team cooperated fully with investigators. They provided every document Claire had helped translate, along with formal statements about what had transpired during the negotiation session. The Main Street redevelopment plan was shelved indefinitely. Maple Court Apartments remained exactly where it had always stood, its residents safe in the only homes many of them had known for decades. The Wooden Spoon reopened the following Monday, busier than it had been in years. Every booth was full by 7. Cars lined both sides of the street outside, something that had not happened at that diner since the town's bicentennial parade. Owen found Claire before her first shift back, his eyes a little misty. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one, not just a job offer. You already gave me one, Owen, the moment you let me back in that door." "Still," he said, "I let fear make a decision that wasn't mine to make about who deserved a place here." "We all make choices we regret sometimes," Claire said. "What matters is what we do after." Roz hugged her so tightly that morning it nearly knocked the wind from her. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," Roz said, half laughing, half crying. "Losing you for those weeks about broke my heart, honey. I wasn't gone for good, just needed to prove a few things first." "Well, you proved them," Roz said, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. "Proved them plenty." Later that week, Owen quietly took his late wife's old apron out of the drawer behind the register and hung it on a small hook by the kitchen door, where he could see it every time he walked past. He never explained why. Roz never asked. Walter resumed his seat by the window, right on schedule. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, no sugar. Nobody ever tried to move him from that booth again. Chapter 49. A visit to her father. The following weekend, Claire borrowed Owen's old truck and drove 3 hours south, to the quiet cemetery where her father was buried. The drive took her past small towns much like Millhaven, past farmland going golden brown with the season, the radio humming low the whole way down. She had not visited in almost 2 years. She had not been able to bring herself to visit, not since the funeral. Grief had felt too heavy to carry anywhere near his memory. This time felt different. She knelt beside the modest headstone, brushing away a scattering of fallen leaves, and set the leather notebook down gently in the grass beside her. "I found the truth, Dad," she said. "It took a while, longer than it should have, but I found it." She told him everything. The diner, the negotiation, Margaret and Walter and Louise. The whole strange, unlikely chain of small kindnesses that had led her back to the very thing he had spent his life believing in. "You always said truth has patience," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I used to think that was just something you said to make yourself feel better. I understand it differently now." The wind moved gently through the trees above her, rustling leaves already beginning to turn. "Your name is clear," she said, her voice breaking. "Everyone knows now what really happened, who really did it." She sat there a long while, simply keeping him company the way she used to as a little girl, learning new words at his kitchen table. Before she left, she opened the notebook to a blank page near the back. She wrote a short entry of her own, in careful handwriting, in English this time. Some debts take years to repay. This one is paid in full. She closed the notebook and held it against her chest for a moment. Finally, for the first time in a very long while, she felt something close to peace. She sat there a little longer before rising, brushing the grass from her knees and pressing one hand flat against the cool stone in a final, wordless goodbye. Then she drove home, back toward Millhaven, back toward the life she was only just beginning to rebuild. Chapter 50, A Name Restored. 2 weeks later, the Millhaven Gazette ran a front-page story under Peter Dunn's byline, "Local Waitress Uncovers Decades-Old Fraud." The headline read, "Father's Name Finally Cleared." The article detailed everything: Sterling's fraudulent filings, the falsified evidence that destroyed Edward Ashford's career decades earlier, the quiet courage of a young woman who refused to look away from an uncomfortable truth. Louise Fenwick was quoted at length, praising her old colleague's integrity, calling his eventual vindication long overdue. Bradley Sterling issued no public statement. His attorneys, new ones this time, advised silence while the state investigation proceeded. Word eventually reached Millhaven that Sterling Automotive had quietly settled several civil claims. Sterling himself had stepped down from his position as chief executive. His name grew increasingly absent from the company's public materials. Nobody in Millhaven wasted much time thinking about him after that. The town had more pleasant things to focus on. The county held a small gathering that autumn, on the lawn behind Town Hall. It formally announced the preservation of Maple Court Apartments and the surrounding Main Street block. Nearly the whole town turned out. Walter gave a short, gruff, unexpectedly moving speech about neighbors looking out for one another. Dot Pruitt cried through most of it unashamed. Klaus Bergman sent a formal letter to the town council. Along with it came a modest but meaningful donation toward preserving Maple Court Apartments for future generations of Millhaven's elderly residents. He never did complete a deal in it that year. Some townsfolk said he found something far more valuable there instead. At the Wooden Spoon, Owen cleared a small space on the wall behind the counter, just beside the old register. Inside a simple wooden frame, protected under glass, sat Edward Ashford's leather notebook, open to a page filled with careful handwriting in 7 different languages. A small brass plaque beneath it read simply, "In honor of quiet courage and the truths that refuse to stay buried." Chapter 51, What the Quiet Ones Know. Claire stayed in Millhaven through that winter and the spring that followed. The first snow came early that year, dusting Main Street in soft white by mid-November. Ruth Calder strung small lights across her shop window. Owen kept the diner's coffee pot going from 5 in the morning until well past closing. She kept her job at the Wooden Spoon, though she also began slowly, tentatively, accepting occasional translation work again. A few pages here, a brief consultation there. Louise Fenwick called often, gently encouraging her back toward the career she had once abandoned out of grief. "Your father would not want you hiding forever," she told her once. "He'd want you using this gift of yours. Just on your own terms this time." Claire was beginning finally to believe that might be possible. On quiet evenings after closing, she sometimes sat alone at the counter with her father's notebook. She no longer needed to hide it. She no longer needed to carry it like a secret. She had started adding her own pages to it recently. New phrases, new small observations about the town she had come to love. Her father's handwriting filled the first half of that notebook. Her own, she suspected, would fill a great deal of what came next. Walter still took his booth every morning, 7:15 sharp. Margaret still came in most afternoons, tea and a crossword puzzle in hand. Dot Pruitt became a regular too, always stopping to chat a while with Claire before ordering. Klaus Bergmann's postcard from Germany that spring. A simple note, thanking Claire once more. He mentioned, almost in passing, that he had begun mentoring young interpreters through a small foundation he had recently started. He credited the idea, in part, to a waitress he had once met in a small American town. The town of Millhaven had not changed dramatically. Not on the surface, but something quieter had shifted underneath. People looked a little closer now, at the ones they might once have overlooked. The waitress, the old man in the corner booth, the quiet woman with the crossword puzzle. They had learned in the end exactly what this story had always been about. Not languages, not contracts, not even, really, about one millionaire's cruelty finally catching up with him. It was about paying attention, about refusing to mistake someone's quiet for weakness. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room has survived more than anyone else knows. And sometimes, given the chance, they are the ones who end up saving everyone else. Claire's father used to say that truth has patience. It can wait a very long time, but it never ever simply disappears. In Millhaven, Vermont, on an ordinary stretch of Main Street, a leather notebook now sits behind glass. A quiet reminder of exactly how true that turned out to be. And every morning, at 7:15 sharp, an old man still takes his seat by the window, in the same booth that was always, rightfully his. The end.